Bienvenidos, Alasia. Welcome. Taino Hankatu. Soy Boricua y soy puertorriqueña. I'm speaking in three languages, and what I translate in terms of saying Boricua is that my family and my ancestors are from the island of Puerto Rico, and I am a U.S. citizen born here in the United States. It's a real pleasure to be able to sit with you at this time and have an opportunity to share a moment in time that I hope will take you through my journey when we talk about the theme of I am Hispanic. Isla del Borinquen. Isla del Borinquen. Soy puertorriqueña. It was in the spring of 1981, and I was on my way to work, and I had a lot on my mind. And I was walking up the subway stations in New York City, Midtown Manhattan. And around me is the typical whirlwind of traffic, sounds and taxi cars, yellow cabs in particular, making sounds and going really fast. And in many ways, it was a reflection of exactly what was going on in my head. A whirlwind. I had a lot on my mind, but most specifically, the meeting I was about to have with my professor, Serena Nanda. She had been reviewing my paper and said we needed to talk about it. So as I'm walking up the street through Midtown Manhattan, getting ready to approach John Jay College of Criminal Justice, I was a student of anthropology, getting ready to graduate, taking a course in the evening in legal pluralism. And at the same time, I was the secretary to the anthropology department. And so as I'm getting up to the building and I look across the horizon, John Jay College is really located right at the base of the Hudson River in Manhattan, New York, on the west side. And I looked at the river, I took a deep breath, and I relaxed. I said, no matter what happens with this paper, it's going to be okay, Marilyn. I saw the river flowing to the sea, and that is a place of my home in my heart. So I rush up, get into my office. I get busy with the day, students coming in, all the activities that we do in the anthropology department. I had been there now for nearly 7 years. And of course, looking at the clock in front of me, knowing 12 o'clock is going to hit, I'm going to sit with Serena. I'm going to have to talk to her about my paper. And sure enough, clock hit 12. I pick up my notepad. I turn the sign on my office door out to lunch. I walk across the hall and I enter into Dr. Serena Nanda's office. She has her back turned to me. And I knew she knew I was there. And my heart was pacing and pounding. What is she going to tell me about my paper? I sat down, I closed the door, and she took her time, and slowly she turned around. She had a twinkle in her eye. And that made me relax just a bit. And she leans over, and when she leans over, her beautiful long salt and pepper hair just drops over her shoulder. And she kind of hovers next to me, and I can see she has my paper in her hand. And I'm trying to look, because for me, Spanish is my first language, English is my second, and writing was always a challenge. So I try to peek at the paper to see if I see a lot of red marks, and there weren't any. There were a few. And I thought, oh, that's not too bad. And so I'm trying to relax myself. And she has a smile on her face, but a firm look in her eye. And she leans over and she says, Mimi, which was my nickname then, you have a battle in your head. And I went, what? I tried not to get self-conscious about it. I tried to hold back the tears because I got really nervous. But she relaxed me. She held my hand and she said, let's talk about it. And I said, what do you mean, Serena? And she says, Marilyn, I know you're arguing culture and law in your paper, but there are so many voices here that are debating the issue you're trying to present about the influences and the transitions of Caribbean cultural, spiritual traditions functioning in an urban environment. And I said, really? And she said, yes. It's a reflection of the battle that's inside of you, too. It's one you're going to have to figure out if you want to make clear, concise, as an anthropologist in the future, arguments and positions, especially with laws that are part of a society and laws that are part of a culture. And I went, wow. And I watched as she pointed out the different ways that my traditional cultures within me were also debating the society and the culture that I was living in. And in that moment, I knew. Serena set my heart on fire. She said, Marilyn, Mimi, you've got to figure this out. And then you'll be able to understand, even if you want to choose to go into law, how to make a debate that focuses on culture and the intersectionality of cultures. And I was like, wow, Serena, you're so right. And she smiled and she said, you know what to do. And I told her, you're right, I do. She never mentioned about my writing. She never said to me that I wasn't challenged by the code switching of Spanish and English. But what she did say to me, with all the discussion we had, was that I speak Spanish, but I am a woman of many cultures. And it was time for me to find out more. Well, that was in 1981. I graduated. I stood with the department with my bachelor's naturally, and then I stood with the department. Why not? And the years would come. And then in 1984, I had a very powerful experience, one that required me to really now have my own anthropological experience. I was ready now to consider graduate school, to take a look at what I wanted to do. I made the decision on that day. I'm not going to be a lawyer fighting advocacy and the laws of this country. I'm going to learn the laws of my cultures, and through that, find the middle ground of peace. Because I realized as a Puerto Rican woman raised on the Caribbean island in New York City, that I was a blending of cultures. So in that moment and from that moment on, I refused to see myself as a race because inside I knew I was a blending of cultures. And a Puerto Rican woman is a nationality. A Puerto Rican man is a nationality. It's a place on a little island in the Caribbean where all these cultures converged and where history speaks so much of who we are. I grew up in a rainbow of colors. And when I would come to the States, back to the States after the times I spent on the island as a little girl, it was always so hard and so confusing. Be black, be white. And I was the in-between. My father was as dark as the night sky with eyes that sparkle like the stars. And my mother was as fair as the clouds that roll across the sky. And I was this blending of all and that in between. Well, the situation resulted in my mom saying to me, Marilyn, tienes que ir a Puerto Rico. You have to go home. You have to go back. And so I did. And I had an opportunity to sit with my great-grandmother, who represented the colonial aspects of Spanish culture and language, who came from Mallorca, Spain as a child, and who ultimately impacted me so greatly on so many levels. She was 106, and I sat in front of her with tears in my eyes, and she held my face, and her hands were such a soft reflection of a century of time, and her eyes were as blue as the Caribbean Sea, and she gave me her blessing. At 106, I didn't realize from that moment on, and when I left the island, that it would be the last time I see her. 4 years later, she passed on to the ancestral realm, but she let me know to be myself, to embrace this part of my Spanish lineage and my language. At the same time, in those months when I came back, my brother and my father said to me, you need to go back. You need to go back to Africa. You need to see and understand. And my brother argued that fiercely for my dad. And my dad said, okay. And the two of them together paid for my airline ticket to go back to Africa. My first trip outside of this country to honor my father's line. And indeed, the summer came, the semester ended. I looked at all my colleagues there and I said, okay, I'm going to have my own trip. I got on the plane and traveled through France, connecting from France into Western Nigeria. There, my elders were waiting for me. You see, I was already immersed and ordained in my African traditions through the symbol of Sankofa and the blending of cultures. It was time now for me to understand what happened with Cuba, what happened with the Dominican Republic, and what happened in the island, and all the convergence that occurred. I arrived in Africa and so much unfolded. But the most significant thing was that I was only going to be there for a couple of weeks because of a project I wanted to do. And I stayed for 2 months. I couldn't leave. And I was hosted by ASADA, the African Religious Society of African Descendants. And so much unfolded. But most importantly, I was given a new name, Omifunke. The waters have returned, the last born of the line. When I left with so much more than just understanding who I was. I left with a reclamation of my African lineage. I knew my Spaniard. I knew that when I went back to New York, I was going to travel. And, and that's what I began to do. I made a decision to go to graduate school. I said goodbye to all my colleagues that had raised me as a baby anthropologist from 18 years old to now 26. I was ready for graduate school. And Serena Nanda, she came to my house. And on January 23rd, we had a big drumming of African drums and elders who had heard me speak at the museum about Africa and everything I learned and everything I discovered. And I knew the travels would not end there. And they did not. Serena said, Mimi, Omifunke, can I take lots of pictures? And I said, of course you can, Serena. Of course you can. I'm settling the voices, I said to her. And I made a decision. And every year I traveled. I went to the Amazon jungles to honor the roots of the Taino lineage into that region of the world. I traveled and traveled and traveled. And my elders would say to me, Omifunke, you are going to one day do more than what you can understand at this point in time. And that's exactly what happened. I continued to travel. I continued to embrace that I am not a race. I am a blending of cultures. I am a nationality. And living that in New York City and traveling around the world led me all the way to the very destiny my elders were speaking to me about. And Serena had said a long time ago, you will settle the voices in your head. And Serena, I dedicate this to you because if it hadn't been for you, I wouldn't have gone on the search. Yes, I did settle the voices in my head. I am a Hispanic, Latina, African, Native woman. And I embrace all my cultures. I am not a race. I am a nationality. I speak Spanish. I speak English. And I am so proud and honored to be able to say to you that this is the time where I can truly live out what my elders gave me. I received 2 chieftaincies from 2 amazing women from the village of Imota. Chief Olumeto Agbomola of Imota, Chief Iyasale Egungun of Imota. And those chieftaincies said to me, one day you will work with children and you will help them and you will teach them all that you live because I am a traditional storyteller. I am in a Yanifa. Story is the life. The reclamation of story of our ancestors makes us something more than a race. It honors that we are human. And the laws of all those cultures of humanity make me who I am today.